You are watching BBC Newsday to get all the updated news of the world. Stay tuned to our channel. Now I will tell you all the updated news.
Breaking news, ball now fully in Israel's hands, Hamas on ceasefire question. Great news, why the suspension of U.S. bomb shipments is a big warning for Israel. Top news, Israel raid on Rafah could be a strategic victory for Hamas, U.S. Update news, Israel is preparing for a bigger attack on Rafah. Biden threatens to stop arms shipments. Listen to the news title so far, now listen to the details.
Ball now fully in Israel's hands. Hamas on ceasefire question. Hamas, the Palestinian armed group, said on Friday that its delegation to Cairo, Egypt, to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza is returning to Qatar. Hamas believes that the ceasefire in Gaza is now entirely up to Israel. These things were said in a message sent by Hamas to various organizations in Palestine. Representatives of Hamas, Israel, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar met in Cairo to try for a ceasefire in Gaza. However, the talks collapsed. Today, Hamas wrote in a message that their delegation that participated in the talks left Cairo for Doha, Qatar. Occupier Israel rejected the mediator's offer. Israel has objected to several important points mentioned in the proposal. As a result, the ball is now completely in Israel's hands. According to an Egyptian government-affiliated media report on Thursday, representatives of both camps left Cairo after 2 days of talks. The talks were held to finalize a ceasefire agreement at this stage of the 7-month conflict in the Gaza Strip. According to a high-level source, mediating countries like Egypt, Qatar, and the United States are continuing to try to resolve the differences between the two sides. On Monday, Hamas said it agreed to a ceasefire proposal made by mediators. According to Hamas, the proposal calls for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and the return of Palestinians displaced by the war. The proposal also calls for the release of hostages held by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. The Israeli Prime Minister's office says the proposal falls far short of Israel's essential demands.
Israël oppose à permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
They want to eliminate Hamas from Gaza. Why the suspension of U.S. bomb shipments is a big warning for Israel. The United States is the one country in the world that has real influence over Israel. But so far, the country has not implemented most of the advice of its closest ally on the Gaza war. The U.S. government says its support for Israel's war against the Palestinian resistance group Hamas is ironclad. However, the country has repeatedly expressed concern over the failure of Israeli forces to protect civilians in Gaza and the obstruction of humanitarian relief in the valley. Israel's ongoing war in Gaza has passed 7 months. At this time, the United States increased the pressure on Israel step by step on that issue. He gave various suggestions in a private manner. Publicly warned. Again, the United States refrained from vetoing a resolution against Israel at the United Nations. Not only this, the U.S. has imposed sanctions against some of the illegal Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. Israel's ongoing war in Gaza has passed 7 months. At this time, the United States increased the pressure on Israel step by step on that issue. He gave various suggestions in a private manner. Publicly warned. Again, the United States refrained from vetoing a resolution against Israel at the United Nations. A month ago, U.S. President Joe Biden had an exciting phone conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In the conversation, Biden told Netanyahu that if Israel blocked aid trucks from crossing the border into Gaza, he would cut U.S. aid to the country. So far, however, Israel has not heeded much of the advice and pressure from its ally, the United States. So now the United States has started swinging its biggest stick on Israel. The United States is the largest supplier of arms and ammunition to Israel. Washington is supplying Israel with $3.8 billion worth of weapons every year. The goal is to give Israel an added advantage over its neighbors. Last month, the U.S. Congress passed a bill to provide an additional $14 billion in military aid to Israel. Now the Biden administration has suspended arms shipments to Israel for the first time. A senior administration official confirmed to the BBC that the delivery of thousands of bombs weighing 2,000 pounds and other weights has been suspended. Other arms sales to Israel are also being reviewed, the official said. It also includes equipment that can be used to convert conventional bombs into missiles capable of hitting specific targets. So the question arises, why is the U.S. finally trying to use perhaps its biggest tool of influence over Israel? The first answer is a possible all-out Israeli military operation in Rafah, Gaza's southernmost and most densely populated city. The United States and many Western countries fear that such an operation will cause massive civilian casualties and humanitarian catastrophe. U.S. officials say the bombs they have suspended shipping to Israel may have been used in Rafah. The use of these bombs in densely populated urban areas can have disastrous consequences. The U.S. does not want an Israeli operation in Rafah. Suspension of arms shipments is another way to reinforce this message. A U.S. official told the Washington Post, Israel raid on Rafah could be a strategic victory for Hamas. U.S. The U.S. has warned Israel that an all-out offensive in Gaza's Rafah as planned could give Hamas a strategic victory. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby gave this warning on Thursday. John Kirby said, "We think any major operation in Rafah will actually strengthen Hamas's hand at the negotiation table, not Israel's," expressed his opinion. Meanwhile, a resolution recommending more rights and benefits to Palestine is likely to be voted on by the UN General Assembly on Friday. The resolution will call on the Security Council to consider recognizing Palestine as the 194th member state of the United Nations. Earlier, the United States had vetoed such a proposal last April. The resolution also proposed paving the way for Palestine to become a full member of the United Nations. Palestine has long sought UN membership and Israel has been taking steps to block it. U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Wood, clarified yesterday that the Biden administration has objections to the proposal being made in the General Assembly. Ceasefire negotiations. If Hamas and Israel are to reach an agreement on a ceasefire and prisoner exchange, the two sides must show more flexibility, Egypt said. The Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is playing the role of mediator in the ceasefire talks, said this in a statement today. The same opinion was also expressed in the phone conversation between U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Egypt's Foreign Minister Sami Shoukry. Earlier today, Hamas said its delegation had left Cairo for Doha to participate in ceasefire talks. They also mentioned that the ball is now in Israel's court. On the other hand, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, Israel will stand alone if necessary and will fight with the last of its capabilities. He said this in response to U.S. President Joe Biden's warning to stop arms shipments. Israel is preparing for a bigger attack on Rafah. Israel shelled the eastern part of Rafah in Gaza last Wednesday night. Ignoring U.S. threats to stop arms shipments, the country is massing military equipment and troops along the border with a large number of tanks to launch a larger attack. Meanwhile, at least 60 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza in the last 24 hours. The Ministry of Health of Gaza reported this on Thursday. With this, 34,904 people have been killed by Israel's attack on Gaza since October 7th. 70% of the Palestinians killed were children and women. 3 bodies were brought to the Kuwait specialized hospital there on Thursday morning after continuous overnight attacks in eastern Rafah. After removing the bodies from the bag, the frozen body of a child is seen. Only the Kuwaiti hospital in Rafah, southern Gaza, is now fully operational. There is only 3 days of fuel left to keep hospitals in southern Gaza running, the World Health Organization said. Israeli forces also attacked the western part of Rafah. 4 people were killed in an attack by Israeli forces in Tal al-Sultan area on Wednesday. 25 people were injured. The Kuwaiti hospital reported this. Louise Waitridge, communications officer of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, said that the Israeli forces have carried out a massive bombardment in Rafah in the last 24 hours, which is equal to the attacks carried out in the area in the last 2 weeks. Israeli forces ordered residents to evacuate from the eastern Rafah area on Monday. Israeli tanks entered there that night. The next day, the Israeli forces occupied the Rafah crossing on the border with Egypt. It virtually cut off the besieged Gaza from the rest of the world. Apart from this, The Kerem-Salem crossing on Gaza's border with Israel was closed yesterday for the fourth day in a row. Israeli protesters have blocked a relief convoy sent by Jordan. The closure of the Rafah and Kerem-Salem crossings has cut off all aid supplies from the outside to Gaza. Meanwhile, the residents are leaving Rafah in desperation in the face of Israeli forces' attacks. Some areas east of the Rafah have been completely depopulated. About 79,000 Palestinians have left Rafah since Monday, UNRWA said. Biden threatens to stop arms shipments. U.S. President Joe Biden has said that if Israel carries out a major operation in Rafah, he will stop the supply of U.S. weapons to the country. He gave this warning to the ally Israel in an interview given to CNN on Wednesday. This is the first time Biden has publicly warned Israel directly since the start of the Gaza war. Biden admits that Israel is using U.S. weapons to kill civilians in Gaza. The United States last week suspended a major shipment of U.S. bombs as Israel prepares to launch a major military operation in Rafah. After that incident, a new warning came from Biden. Meanwhile, despite Biden's warning, Israel is preparing to launch a major operation in Gaza. According to a Reuters report, Israeli forces have gathered a large number of tanks and armored vehicles in the Rafah border area.